Okay, welcome to the first of what I hope will be many literature tutorials. I plan to do a few of these throughout the year, so hopefully you'll find them useful. I thought the first one should be on how to write a passage analysis, as hands down that's probably the thing I get asked about the most and the thing that I find students are concerned about the most. As a literature assessor of exams for the past couple of years, one thing I've noticed is that students have a really wide variety of styles that they write in. So there is no set way to do this, but what I thought I'd run you through is a way you could approach it if you're struggling and you're not entirely sure what to do. So I know you would have written these a lot last year, but it doesn't hurt to have a bit of a refresher. And we will be writing a lot of these this year, so good to go back over it. Always start, obviously, with reading the passage carefully. So the first time I read it, I read for meaning. So what is this passage about? What's happening here? Whereabouts in the text is this passage occurring? Those are the kind of things I look for. Then I read it through again, once or twice, and I annotate. Looking for key ideas that the author discusses throughout the whole text. Language use, so areas that I could use for a bit of close language analysis, that's always really good. Any sort of character development, anything that's really significant are the things that I'm looking for when I annotate. I do like to use different colours when I annotate, so it might be, I might annotate some specific language use in red. I might annotate something to do with passion in green. There might be something about women's role in society. I might do that in blue. So that then when I go back and I look at it, I can see the key things that stand out and I can start to make connections. So that helps. And obviously it's really important that you show an understanding of where the passage is in the context of the text. So if we're talking about Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, is the passage from Act 1, Act 2, Act 3? Showing an understanding there is quite helpful. Once I've annotated, I have a look at the annotations and then I see what stands out. So there might be an idea that's repeated a couple of times in the passage. So that's something I might grab onto and I might say, okay, I'm going to use that to start to develop my interpretation. So you want to use the passage as a springboard for a discussion on the text. Okay. So this is where literature differs to English. English, you have a question, you respond to that question. There is no question in literature. So you have to think about, based on the passage, what can you write about? Okay. Now you also have to use the passage to talk about the wider text. So the things that you find in the passage, you need to make connections between that and the wider text. Okay. So it's really important to go in and out of the passage. So into the passage, out to the wider text, back into the passage, back out to the wider text. Okay, so once you've got your interpretation or you've got some ideas about what you could write about, then it's good to make a plan. Now, because it's not a text response, there's no teal or anything like that, your plan doesn't have to be very detailed, but I would recommend dot pointing a few ideas about what your interpretation is going to be focused on. I usually say it's good to try and write at least 2 or 3 paragraphs. So you might have some dot points as to what's going to go into those paragraphs. But it can be a very, very basic plan. But at least if you've got an idea of what you want to talk about, it does help. When it comes to writing, one of the most commonly asked questions is, do you need an introduction? You don't need a text response introduction, that's for sure. So avoid that generic, in Tennessee Williams' Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, we see blah, 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 blah. Avoid that, okay? But you do need some kind of way to start it off. So it might be that you use a quote from the passage that is significant to the interpretation that you're going to discuss. You might very briefly outline what your interpretation is, or you can just jump straight in. Okay, that's the beauty of literature, is that there is no set way to do this. Okay, As long as you avoid the text response style of introduction, you'll be fine. Just going back to introductions, it's probably a good idea to go onto the VCAR website and have a look at some of the past exam responses, and they put the really good ones up, and you'll see really great examples of how those students have started their introductions. That's a good resource to use. Okay, so what to include in your essay, in your passage analysis? So the main focus obviously is developing interpretation. However, there are some other things that must be in there. Very, very important, you must have some close language analysis. Okay, when you get assessed in your SACs and in your exam, part of that assessment is whether you have a good, clear discussion of the language. Okay, so it's really important that you can show that you can work with the language in the passage and analyse how that's been used. Okay, so if you're going for 3 paragraphs, I'd say you need at least one piece of close language analysis in each paragraph. You also need to mention the views and values of the author. Okay, so starting a sentence with the author's name, Williams demonstrates, or Williams conveys the notion that women were not overly valued within that society. Something like that. So a simple statement of what he is trying to show us about his views and values, or the views and values of the time in which he was writing. Okay, that's important as well. Now, again, when you come to finishing your passage analysis, you don't need a separate conclusion, but you do need to wrap it up in some way. So a nice finishing sentence at the end, and proofreading is good. You don't necessarily lose marks for spelling, however, cohesion is important. So making sure that your writing flows really smoothly and that you've got plenty of meta language in there. Really sophisticated meta language and vocabulary is what will separate a top response from a medium response. Okay, so it's really important to try and work on that vocab, and I'll be at you a lot on that this year. I like to read it out loud to see if my sentences flow and make sense, but that's just me. Okay, so what I've done, just to show you a little bit more about what I would do in this kind of situation if I was writing a passage analysis, I've got a passage here, a sample passage taken from Tennessee Williams' Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. So I want to read through this, and I've actually started to annotate it a little bit. Okay, I'll show you how I would annotate. So this is a passage where Margaret and Brick are having a discussion early in Act 1. Okay, so Margaret, or Maggie, is sort of having a go at Brick, wishing that he would lose his good looks, wishing that he was less detached from life, from everything. She talks about how much she enjoyed him as a lover, that he was really good in bed, and that if she thought that he would never make love to her again, she would kill herself, so it's quite dramatic. Then they hear sounds of croquet in the background. She finds that ironic that, you know, they're playing croquet and Big Daddy's dying of cancer. And then she mentions Skipper, and it's one of the sort of early mentions of Skipper, and the tension really builds there. She tells him that he can't just be silent, that he needs to talk to her. He drops her crutch. We know that his crutch, that we know that he's broken his ankle, so he's got a crutch to get around on. She says, "Lean on me." He doesn't want to. They have a bit of a fight. And that's the end of the passage, where Brix turns and smiles at her coolly over his fresh drink. Okay, obviously I would read that in a lot more detail, but we don't need to worry about that right now. So, annotating. So I'm going to look for some things that stand out there. Um, so yes, she talks about her looks, his drinking, but that's not that exciting. A person who didn't know you would think you'd never had a tense nerve in your body or a strained muscle. I'm going to highlight that because this goes with, oops, that's I highlighted that. This goes with the idea of Brick being detached, relaxed, cool. We hear in the stage directions there are sounds of croquet on the lawn below, the click of mallets, light voices near and distant. I'm going to highlight that as well because I think the stage directions are quite significant. That's an ugly colour. So I'm going to highlight. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to highlight that in a better colour. Sorry. Okay. And then here again, mentioning his detached quality. So I'm going to highlight that. In the same colour as what I did the previous statement. Why haven't that highlight? Okay, so I've written a comment there that says Brick's detachment from the world. So that's sort of already jumping out to me as an important part of this passage. Here as well, you look so cool, so enviably cool. Okay, that seems significant. Stage directions, music is heard. Okay, they're playing croquet. Again, that's mentioning similar to what the stage directions were mentioning before. The moon has appeared. It's white, just beginning to turn yellow. Interesting, atmospheric, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. You're a wonderful lover in his indifference. So again, that detachment, no anxiety. He was indifferent as well. I'm going to highlight that there. And then you've got Maggie being extremely dramatic, so I guess that tells us something about her character as well. And then you've got the croquet again. So you've got this monologue of Maggie's interspersed with sounds of croquet, which croquet is typically, it's very light-hearted. It's a game. It's not anything serious, so it's an interesting contrast. And then you've got Maggie mentioning the cat and the hot tin roof, which is a reoccurring motif. And it's interesting that she refers to that a lot. And women are also referred to as cats and scratching and all that kind of thing. So it says something about both their relationship but also the position of women that they talked about in those terms. More croquet sounds. And then the contrast between the croquet and Big Daddy dying of cancer. I think that's quite interesting as well. Okay, the importance of communication. Excuse me. And the significance of Brick's crutch, which is mentioned several times in the passage. I've got here the idea that if you're silent, things fester and become malignant. So the use of the word malignant obviously has connotations to cancer. So making that analogy between silence and cancer. Brick's crutch again, drops his crutch. Maggie asks him to lean on her. He just wants his crutch. So there's a lot of mentions of the crutch. So that to me is sort of standing out as well. That might be something that I could look at because that's repeated several times. See, it's quite a lot there. And then it's interesting that for the first time in the passage, Brick starts to lose his cool. He starts to lose that indifferent air that he has, where Maggie says a crack in the wall. So obviously Brick's name it's a strong name. It's something that isn't supposed to crack, and yet here he's just starting to crack a little bit perhaps. But then in the last little bit of stage direction, he's back to being his cool self. Okay, so key ideas that are standing out to me, obviously the indifference and the detachment of Brick. So that's really important. The contrast between the tension in the room and the croquet game outside. Now, remember that this play takes place in one room, in one space, the whole action of the play around the bedroom and more significantly the bed. So I think that's pretty interesting. Brick's crutch and his loss composure towards the end. If I can spell composure. Okay, that's going to be, I think, what I want to focus on in my passage analysis. So even though Maggie is talking for most of that, it's all about Brick. It's all about his character and what he's thinking, how he reacts to people, his indifference. So that's what I want to focus on. I want to focus on his character, his indifference. I also want to look at this idea of a crutch and why is it mentioned so often? So when things like that, that's where language analysis comes in. If a word is repeated as commonly as that is there, why is it repeated? What's Williams trying to demonstrate there? And then also the croquet game. The croquet is mentioned a lot as well, so he really wants to emphasise that this croquet game is happening outside. Why? What's the point of that? So those are the areas that I would be thinking about. All right, so I've actually had a go at writing one, just to show you the kind of thing that I guess you need to be doing when you're writing a passage analysis. So, Williams' aptly named Brick demonstrates an impressive ability to remain detached from the world and everything and everyone in it. He is able to retain his detached quality until events later in the play force him to face reality. In his play, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Tennessee Williams delineates that one must face up to the truth, no matter how difficult, in order to avoid being surrounded by mendacity. Alright, so that's my introduction. So in there I've tried to give an overview of what I actually am going to talk about. So my focus here is Brick's detachment, and you can see that from the introduction. I've used a quote in there, his detached quality from the passage, and I've also mentioned mendacity, which is a very common word that comes up in the play. I don't know if you can hear the noise in the background, but I have 2 children and a dog, and they're having all sorts of fun in the background, so hopefully that's not too distracting. Alright, so my introduction, it's pretty straightforward, nothing too difficult there. Throughout the passage, Maggie constantly comments on Brick's indifference, detachment, and the fact that he is so cool, so enviably cool. Her longing and her desperation for him make no impact on his cold veneer. Brick seems to be at the centre of everyone's lives. They seek him out, seek his love or approval, yet he remains unmoved and passive in the midst of this. In contrast to Brick's indifference is Maggie, and the zoomorphic comparison of her to a cat who is willing to scratch, claw, and do anything to save her in Brick's relationship. Maggie's wild declaration that she will pick out the longest and sharpest knife she could find and stick it straight into her heart provokes no response from Brick. It isn't until later in the play when Skipper's name is mentioned that Brick's facade finally crumbles. Okay, so what we've got there is his detachment and how Maggie is trying to provoke a reaction in him but to no avail. I've used quite a few quotes in there. I haven't really got any language analysis, and I probably should have looking at that now. That might be something that I would need to add in there on reflection. Williams uses the stage directions to highlight the metaphorical significance of Brick's crutch. Without his crutch, Brick is immobile and dependent on others. With it, he has some freedom to move and escape Maggie's declarations and accusations. The many stage directions mentioning Brick's crutch, such as Brick takes up his crutch rises, he drops his crutch, are used by Williams to emphasise that while Brick is seemingly independent and indifferent, without his crutch he is defenceless. When he drops his crutch, it is Maggie's offer to lean on me that almost breaks through his defences as he retorts, I don't want to lean on your shoulder, I want my crutch. Williams has italicised this speech to emphasise its significance. The fact that Brick has ever so slightly lost his cool, detached air for the first time in the play. Maggie notices this and comments that there is perhaps a crack in the wall. Brick is portrayed as a weak character who relies on his literal crutch, as well as his metaphorical crutch, alcohol. Later there is a suggestion that Brick started drinking after Skipper's death, replacing his dependence on Skipper with alcohol. Okay, so I've taken that mention of the crutch and I've analysed that. So it's not specific language analysis in a typical way, but what it's doing is analysing that the use of that word crutch and why it's used so much and why it's so significant. So I think that's okay. Again, a lot of quotes and a lot of use of the passage, a little bit of going outside of the passage, but not a whole lot. Perhaps could do that a bit more. Williams also uses stage directions in this scene to build atmosphere and describe the sounds that can be heard outside Brick and Maggie's room. As all the action centres around their room, and more significantly their bed, the sounds and lighting are important to hint at the world that exists outside of this room. In the passage we can hear the sounds of music and croquet on the lawn below. This light-hearted pastime provides a great contrast to the tension that can be found in Maggie and Brick's bedroom and the seriousness of the topics they are discussing. Maggie denotes this in her comment, yes, they're playing croquet. Big Daddy is dying of cancer. It is here that Williams returns to one of his repeated concerns through the analogy of cancer and a lack of communication. In Maggie's monologue, she states that silence about a thing magnifies it. It grows and festers in silence, becoming malignant. The words fester and malignant hint at something dark and cancerous. Through this, Williams elucidates that people must be open and honest at all times. Maggie clearly states that Brick's silence and detachment is dangerous and counterproductive to living a full and vibrant life. Okay, so that's it. So there, again, I've done a bit of close language analysis, looking at the words fester and malignant and the connotations that they have. Also at why there's such an insistent repetition of stage directions for croquet. It's very important to remember that when you're writing about a play, you have to acknowledge that it is a play and that with a play that there are stage directions, and that's part of the text. So you don't just look at the words spoken by characters, but also look at the stage directions. You'll see there that I haven't got a separate conclusion, that I've really only got one line of a conclusion. Maggie clearly states that Brick's silence and detachment is dangerous and counterproductive to living a full and vibrant life. So I've gone back to that idea of him being detached and also talking about communication, and that's fine. That's all you need. A sentence can be enough to wrap it all up. So that's a bit of a rough go. I wrote that late last night, but it's okay. There are some things that need to be tweaked there. Obviously, I think I need a bit more close language analysis, and I probably need a bit more going out into the play, the wider play, going out from the passage. But there are some things that are okay in there. I think I've developed the ideas in the passage pretty well. So I guess that's a rough example of what you could do if you were given a passage like that. We'll do some practice and I'll give you a couple of passages where you'll have a go at what I've just done. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Thanks for listening. See ya.